Hey, everybody, live from remote, wherever you are. We're still enjoying pancakes, even though we wish we were all still in Amsterdam. I'm Alex Williams, founder and publisher of the New Stack, and I have a great group here with me today. Joining us are Priyanka Sharma. Hi, Priyanka. How are you?
Hello, Alex and everybody else. I am great. Excited to be here virtually eating pancakes.
Priyanka is general manager of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Janakiram MSV, principal analyst at Janakiram Associates. Hello, Johnny.
Hey, Alex. Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And Patrick McFadin, chief evangelist for Apache Cassandra at DataStax.
Morning, Alex. So here we are. I came for the pancakes, but I'm staying for the Kubernetes.
That's right. All right. And Bill Zajac, regional director of solutions engineering at Dynatrace. Hey, Bill.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Hey, I got my pancakes here. Can somebody pass me the syrup or butter or anything that you might have over there? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Oh, thanks for the butter.
Got the Costco sauce.
Toppings.
Yeah, topping. Oh, yeah, nice job.
I'm going to start with the syrup here and put them on my pancakes. I think one of the things I wanted to do is let's share a little Amsterdam here. Look at those pancakes. So that's from a restaurant in Amsterdam. Oh, good old Amsterdam. Oh, what a wonderful place it is.
Is this supposed to be a tease? Because I really wanted to be there.
I know. I think it is. It feels like that, doesn't it? So in any case, I want to just thank you all again for being here. And our discussion really is about, is Kubernetes boring yet? And I want to ask that question, and specifically, what's on your stack? We're talking pancakes here. We might as well talk about technology stacks. And one of the things that we are seeing is it's what's on top of Kubernetes that counts. Infrastructure is almost becoming boring, as some people would say. Craig McCluskey calls it a natural substrate that is just becoming part of what we do. Kelsey Hightower would say that the plumbing works. Now it's important what's on top of it. So that's the question I really want to ask today. And Priyanka, maybe I can start with you. Is Kubernetes boring? Yeah. Is the plumbing working? Is the stack there for people? And, what are the different types of stacks that you're seeing people develop?
Yes, absolutely. I think Kubernetes is getting close to boring, and we are very proud of that. It's a good thing. It's solid and mature, and that's equivalent to boring. And I say kudos to the community and ecosystem for getting there. I think in all seriousness, this is not something to underestimate just because of all the hard work that goes into making something stable and reliable. I think, though, while the core technology itself might be approaching boring, I don't think that's the case for all the surrounding ecosystem around it. If you think specifically, let's say carrier networking, there's a tremendous opportunity for telecoms to modernize their infrastructure needs and reduce operating costs. And that's something there's a lot of work going on with conjunction of CNCF and Linux Foundation networking, in which lots of telcos are involved. So that's an area where I see a lot of interesting happening soon, currently happening and continuing to evolve. I think those use cases will become more and more popular. People will see that. Additionally, I think by using Kubernetes, you come up with new challenges as a software company, as an engineering organization. And that space, I think, is still, there's a lot of innovation happening. I mean, I think very recently it's kind of become clear that service meshes are very important, and it's going to be a multi-mesh world. So that's awesome. We want to support multiple service meshes bloom and standardize and do the best things for their end users. So I think there's a lot of interesting coming soon with the foundation of a boring Kubernetes, which is exactly how it should be.
Johnny, I'd like to ask you this question. Priyanka was just talking about service mesh, which is an interesting topic these days. She's talking about the support of multiple service meshes, and she's talking a lot about, I think, what comes down to participation in the community and who actually is represented and how they get represented properly, which plays a big part in developer experiences, which plays a big part in the actual technology architectures themselves. So, Johnny, what's your thought on the architectures of today and the plumbing itself and what's being built on top? Are we ready to really build on top? And how do these community plays play a role?
Oh, absolutely. So service mesh is becoming the foundation for exposing a lot of developer experience. Whether it is Linkerd or Istio, it is plugging a very important gap in the Kubernetes stack, particularly by bringing in the security, the secure communication across microservices, the network policies, and also observability. And then once we have the service mesh infrastructure on top of the core Kubernetes foundation, that opens up additional developer experience. And it is also becoming the foundation for serverless. For example, if you look at Knative, Knative is built on top of Istio. And that is actually delivering the serverless and event-driven execution on top of Kubernetes. So in terms of innovation, we are going to see a lot of advancements when it comes to service mesh, whether it is multi-cluster, federated service mesh, hybrid service mesh, which will cut across on-prem, public cloud, and hybrid cloud. It is going to be a very, very important technology. And it is also the foundation for the developer experience on top of Kubernetes.
I'd like to just point out that one of the key highlights I was making was that Kubernetes being boring, Kubernetes being stable enables all this to exist. And then it could improve the developer experience. So the boring is critical for the interesting, for what it's worth.
Well, Bill, I have a question then. What's not boring?
So anything that's really beyond the microservices development inside of Kubernetes is really fascinating to me. So a lot of the team has already talked about things like functions running inside of Kubernetes, but then the service meshes, as well as simplifying the deployment and automating a lot of these other processes and procedures that need to be able to be deployed inside of these environments in order for management to be able to be maintained. There's lifecycle management solutions and testing solutions and all these other different types of components that it's not boring. There's so much different areas that groups can really even focus, but still contribute to whatever they're really interested in as well.
Patrick, and transitioning here into this larger discussion, when we start to look at the actual deployments out there, one of the things that we found in our research, and it's in our ebook that we're publishing in the next week or two about Kubernetes, is really the second edition of it. Little shameless plug there.
Download
now. We were finding that the deployments with more than 5 clusters have continued to rise, but mostly among larger companies. And I'm curious what this says to you about the trajectory of growth and adoption for Kubernetes. And there's projects here that I think speak to that, but perhaps you have some thoughts there on the actual growth and adoption of Kubernetes as it relates to clusters.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to application infrastructure, Kubernetes is clearly establishing itself as this is the way to do it, and across clouds, on-prem, wherever you are. I think there's to kind of go back to this, is it boring yet? No, it's actually super exciting right now. We're at the end of the beginning. Kubernetes, as it grew, and this is just me as an infrastructure guy, I think it's replaced the app server. And so you see that deployment. You're not going to see deployments of JBoss and WebSphere. You're going to see deployments of Kubernetes. And what's really interesting now is, and that I work quite a bit in this, there's just communities popping up around data in Kubernetes. And that's the missing link right now. I just did a talk this week about, is Kubernetes ready for data? And spoiler alert, no, it's not. It's built for applications. And you see that growth happening on the application tier. We're dumping things like running scripts, I hate to say it, but things like Chef and Terraform are now going away. I love those tools, but they're starting to go away. Service mesh is becoming more the standard. But that growth in clusters is really on the application tier.
What are the issues that people are facing that is leading to improvements in the technology? And Craig McCluskey again brought this up in a podcast we did, and he said that it's not necessarily the innovation of the individual; it's the problems that they're facing, and the problems that they face lead to those new improvements. What are the problems that we're seeing, for instance, in the data plane that are leading to new improvements?
Sure. So, Alex, can I address the first one as well? Enterprises using beyond 5 clusters, and then I'll come back to the data plane. So, a decade ago, the entire industry was talking about what was called as VM sprawl. Remember when VMware was very popular or getting popular among enterprises, and it was extremely easy to launch a VM. Everyone went ahead and launched their own virtual machine. And a lot of VMs were lurking around in the enterprise data center. And it was very difficult for enterprise IT to take control and to basically do a stock check on where the VMs are running, how many VMs are running, and whether they are compliant or not. Now, fast forward to 2020, Kubernetes is experiencing a similar cluster sprawl. Today, it is extremely easy for developers to push a button and deploy a Kubernetes cluster. So whether it is managed Kubernetes service running in the cloud or a minikube running on developer's laptop or more miniature versions of Kubernetes like Kind and K3s, there is Kubernetes everywhere. And that is actually resulting in a cluster sprawl. And again, enterprise IT is concerned that they have absolutely no control over the cluster sprawl. They're not able to basically enforce and impose certain policies that are absolutely critical for enterprises. So there are two parallel streams that are actually taking place. One, the industry has started to realize that just the control plane that is managing Kubernetes is not enough to take care of the cluster sprawl. So in the last 1 year, we have seen the meta control plane emerge. And this meta control plane is the control plane of control planes, right? Google was the first to come out with Anthos. And the core premise of Anthos is you run a Kubernetes cluster anywhere, we'll manage it from GCP's control plane. Then followed VMware, with Heptio acquisition and Pivotal coming to VMware. They actually launched Tanzu Mission Control. And Tanzu's promise is exactly the same. We don't care where you run your cluster. We don't care which flavor of Kubernetes cluster you are running, but we will take care of the meta control plane. And then came Azure Arc, and then IBM Multi-Cloud Manager, which is now rebranded as Red Hat Advanced Cluster Manager. And then we have Rancher, which is an open source and now a part of SUSE. So it's a very interesting trend that we are seeing in the industry where days are gone when we are talking about managing a set of machines through an orchestrator, which is the Kubernetes control plane. But now there is a sprawl of clusters, and we actually need a new meta layer to manage these clusters. And that's where there is a very interesting trend. And this is going to enable enterprises to enforce policies irrespective of where the clusters are running. That is on the commercial vendor side. Now, the cluster API, the actual SIG that is working on managing the lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters from an existing Kubernetes cluster is picking up a lot of momentum. So we'll actually see how a Kubernetes cluster can spawn a child cluster and manage the entire lifecycle just the way you do it with a pod. So these two trends are going to be significantly important for the future of Kubernetes. The meta control plane, the commercial implementation, and then the cluster API, which is going to manage the lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters. And this is going to put some kind of, the method to madness when it comes to managing dozens of Kubernetes clusters. So that is a very, very important trend that I want to call out.
Priyanka.
Hear what Johnny said. So thank you for that very articulate description. I think you're exactly spot on that this is the new trend, and it's based on, as Alex was asking, what are the problems people are facing, which is there's cluster sprawl, there's so much going on. I would like to say, in general, going back to the original conversation of it's like some people have more than 5 clusters on the rise, etc. It's like there's no right size cluster for anyone. I mean, you can easily have around 1,000 nodes per cluster, and like that's fine for certain companies of certain size. But the real issue, as Johnny was saying, was that people have to manage, they have various deployments in various clouds, and having a meta control plane that takes care of it is what helps people. I think, and the cluster API is also like supporting that whole thing. The key, I think, that tells us is that the multi-cloud world is the reality. It's here to stay. And that's a lot of innovation, not just in the cluster management, but otherwise is going to happen with that in mind. How can we help enterprises, end users, big or small, be able to go wherever the workloads are, swap around workloads easily? The portability is going to be on everybody, top of mind for everyone, because it's unlikely that someone will stick to one cloud provider or bare metal or anything across a vast amount of applications and products.
Bill, I'm curious in your thoughts here about that role that we have now with clusters, and especially because you were talking earlier about automation and the clear need for automation.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see a lot of large organizations have multiple clusters, and some of the reasons are more technical and some of them are more political. The technical reasons, high availability, scalability requirements, geographical requirements, all make sense. But a lot of organizations have multiple modernization projects going on internally, but every single core of those modernization projects is based on Kubernetes, which just speaks to the breadth and scope of what the platform can ultimately do as well. So it's everyone is betting on one horse, just changing it a little bit differently and tweaking it a little bit differently to their specific use case.
Patrick, one of the questions I have is about what Johnny was referring to. He calls these new management platforms, these Kubernetes management platforms that are emerging, such as Anthos. I've heard them described as MOMs, management on management platforms. And it also speaks then to one of the questions that I hear a lot these days is about what is then the role of the platform operator? What are the roles of the people who are not just the developers, who are, all they want to do is code, that's just kind of their interest. There's also this camp of power users out there who want to know about the infrastructure. They want to know what's underneath. And, but they still need help as well, and they still need these ways to manage their clusters. And we're seeing, for instance, at DataStack, you're building out operators. And so I'm wondering how you piece these pieces together when you're thinking about the overall management of these clusters and the sprawl that we're referring to here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, the MOMs, yes. And that points to, I think something that can be addressed inside of the Kubernetes project where, there's a usability gap. As soon as you see operators of operators, that's one of the things that we're trying to work through, especially when it comes to storage and data and things like that. You have all these dependency management. So, and that could be a real potential pitfall for the project is when it becomes over stressed and it becomes impossible to work with. I mean, for sure, service companies such as the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts are going to try to make that experience a lot easier. But there's a lot of operators out there that are looking to reduce the toil. And I hear that word a lot, reduce the toil. And we could do, I think, a better job of how we make Kubernetes approachable to mere mortals. You don't have to have 10 years of experience running infrastructure to do it. But operators are going that way. There's some cool projects that are trying to make it even easier, like Kudo. And the KuBuilder, which is an interesting project as well. All of these projects that are happening are trying to make that a little more for mortals, I would say. People that are just trying to get infrastructure out there. Let's get to it. People don't want to run Kubernetes to run Kubernetes. They want to run Kubernetes to deploy an application, to extract value from their company.
Priyanka, I know you'd like to say something. I'd also like to ask you as well about one of the things that we are seeing, and Johnny can attest to this, maybe he can follow up and then we'll go back to Bill again, is we have these third-party providers who are building on open source. And then you have the managed service providers such as the Googles and the AWSs of the world. But the Googles and the AWSs of the world may be more plain vanilla, right, than what the third-party provider offers because of their specific kind of focus on a particular open source technology. So how does that play into the equation here and the factors that we're seeing with this overall experience that really is going to be critical?
Yes, absolutely. I'm actually very happy that that's the case, that you have the cloud providers providing at least the base level that's needed with the managed solutions for Kubernetes. So, you have GKE and AKE and EKS, all of that stuff. So that's really good. And then there's the more specific solutions out there for various reasons. I think at the end of the day, as long as Kubernetes is getting in the hands of developers, we're good. I used to work at GitLab before, and they were doing an excellent job of it. But by connecting the developer experience into a whole DevOps experience. And this is not me trying to make a plug for a certain company, but rather I appreciate that mindset where, in this whole conversation, we've been talking about mere mortals. That's all of us, and that includes DevOps professionals, that includes application developers, platform engineering. There's so many names for teams too, At the end of the day, some tooling that connects the dots across these various job profiles and experiences is successful. And luckily, we see all that happening in combination with the managed services from the cloud providers. So I really think we are on a good trajectory for end users of all job titles to get more and more comfortable with Kubernetes. In addition to tooling, there's also an aspect of learning and training. And something we see a lot at CNCF is the big excitement that people have for our certified Kubernetes admin, certified Kubernetes application developer exams. People are studying hard. There's I think 5,000 CCADs and 10,000 CKAs already in existence. And the rates are doubling, especially, actually in the current world of everybody at home, that there's been a great kind of momentum towards learning more and understanding. So I think this is just, I would say, a little after the beginning, and more education, more and more simplification combined together is going to produce the ongoing results that we're starting to see.
Johnny, before we get started with you, I do want to just say to all the people watching this that you will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. And so we'll have 10 minutes for questions at the end of this discussion. Johnny, I'm curious in your thoughts about that experience overall.
Sure. So there are two things, Alex, that I want to bring up. One is Kubernetes has brought everyone to the same level playing field. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, scale was confined to hyperscale infrastructure providers, GCP, AWS, Azure. But today, Kubernetes has brought hyperscale possible, and it has actually brought that into enterprise data center. And what it actually opened up is additional opportunities to replicate managed services that are exclusively offered by public cloud providers in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And I want to call out two specific examples here. One is the Vitis project, which is actually a CNCF project. And that brings up, the ability to run a highly scalable, highly available managed database-like offering on top of Kubernetes cluster. And in fact, the core committers and founders of Vitis have now built a commercial offering called PlanetScale DB. And PlanetScale DB delivers RDS, Amazon RDS or Azure SQL-like reliability and scale just on Kubernetes. That is one example. And then we have DataStax, which actually built a commercial operator and a completely supported commercial model of Cassandra on top of Kubernetes. And what it actually brings is a very scalable, highly distributed database something on the lines of Amazon Aurora multi-master or Cloud Spanner from Google or Cosmos DB like capabilities, just using Kubernetes cluster and open source databases and commercial operators and commercial support. So, Kubernetes has become the level playing field to bring in additional capabilities that were otherwise confined to just managed service providers and hyperscale providers. Two examples that I wanted to call out.
Yeah, as Patrick just texted to me, a truckload of pancakes just showed up and created a little bit of back noise here. So I did go on mute there for a second. But the questions that I think are coming up more too is, Johnny talks a lot about this, and I'd like to ask Bill. There's this interesting kind scenario developing where we have historically relied on platform as a service technologies in the past to use for developers. But now we're moving more into components and containers as a services are emerging. And I think that's what Johnny is talking about with these management platforms. Mm-hmm. But now you have this issue of configurators and who actually does the configurations? Is it the developer? Is it the operations person? And then on top of that, then you have all the policy issues that come into play, like who manages the clusters. So there's some authentication, for instance, that is critical if you're going to have any kind of really secure environment. Mm-hmm. So, Bill, when you're thinking about through all those, types of issues, what are the top challenges that you see? What are the things that are on your mind a lot?
Well, I think it's what is the overall purpose of what this platform is supposed to provide. And most organizations have some sort of initiative to get time back to the developer, have them just focus on creating custom services, custom logic that's going to move their business forward. So anything that can be done in more of an automated fashion, anything that can be taken out of the picture for them. And although there is the option of choice, how do we reduce the choices that they're going to have to be concerned about? How can they ultimately just create these services that can be put in front of whatever business justification that may be as well? So when it's who's responsible for this, I think this is why we see such an explosion of Kubernetes administrators. I think this is why we see a lot of people investing time, effort, and energy into these open source projects, because it is the underlying pipelines that have to be built. But when it comes to the actual services that have to be hosted on inside of these platforms, we want to reduce the amount of time and effort that those individuals creating those services need to spend in the underlying work as well.
A KA, a Kubernetes administrator, is like, we saw the proliferation of DBs back in the day. Are we going to see the proliferation of Kubernetes administrators? Priyanka, I'm curious from your perspective, are you seeing, is this kind of just the way it's going to have to be if we're going to see Kubernetes being managed throughout an organization? And I'm wondering, are you seeing any companies who are using Kubernetes throughout their organization? I mean, sure, there's some smaller startups who do, but any larger mid-sized companies, and if so or if not, where are they? What's their progress?
Yes. So to that point about Kubernetes administrators, certified Kubernetes administrators are
the certification. I know you guys are big on that these days.
Mm-hmm. Well, not just us, the end users are big on it. That's the big thing, because, I learned about this even before I joined CNCF full time, is my team in the past. One of them was a CKA, and he was so proud of it. And he told me, it's not just an easy cert you can get online. I mean, you have to study hard. There's it's not multiple choice. You have to actually put in answers. And there's real pride people are taking in this deepened knowledge because it's very meaningful. And so I think that's one of the reasons that this certification has really taken off. And that it is a trend, I think, in general about Kubernetes admins. Absolutely. I think a lot of people also do these exams, etc., to, even if they're not going to be the admin in their company, like the person I was talking to is not an admin in the company. But now having this baseline of knowledge, he is able to, educate his team or, participate in cool projects that may otherwise not have been accessible to him. So it's seen as a job development, and correctly so, as like, you're enriching your professional career by doing these, becoming a Kubernetes admin. So I think that is a very healthy thing that's happening. And I think with more and more of such people like popping up in different companies, you don't have to have everyone take those exams or everyone become certified, but the culture becomes very Kubernetes friendly. You can tap your neighbor and ask questions about all these things. So net, I think that trend is good and it's continuing. I think at least I can speak to what we're doing here in CNCF in partnership with LF Training. We are also working through we just launched the security exam certification in security for Kubernetes. And we obviously have the application developer one. And the reason for these coming out is, again, that need for people to gain that extra edge of knowledge as they go about their day to day. Not everybody who takes these exams is in that full-time role. And I see that as a really good thing. So overall, I think these are drivers of success for organizations. And then I think your second question was, what was your second question? Sorry, I got so excited about the training.
Boy, I wanted to actually, let me think about that. I was just like, I think my mind is too, I think my mind's on pancakes. So I was actually thinking about it, more so, well, let's transition. Maybe the better question really here is, what are going to be the challenges that companies are going to have to face in scaling up? And it seems like certification is a big part of it.
I would agree with that. Certification is a big part of it. But of course, there's many elements. When your question is, what are the challenges of scaling up? That's like a wide landscape to answer.
Yeah.
But I think, as one of the panelists was saying, there's the technology aspect of the challenge, and then there is the political or human side of the challenge. And I think when, as organizations look, the size and culture of a company will determine which is, the bigger challenge at hand. So things like this CKA, these certifications really help with bridging the technology gap, really help with like creating a momentum at the grassroots level. At the same time, I think it's extremely important for the leadership, the technical leadership in these companies to start looking at examples, talking to other end users, to just understand what's happened for other people and design their own journey forward. Everybody is truly a special snowflake. And the good news is that with the Kubernetes becoming boring, that the special snowflake part is getting less and less. There's less of the experience is going to be unique, but you have a larger community to rely on. So what we see in our end user community, which I feel a little braggy, but I'll say it, is with 144 members, is like the largest any foundation, open source foundation enjoys. We have these end user only meetings and SIGs where people are coming together talking about specific challenges. And that I think is invaluable. They have this safe space where there are no vendors. I have nothing against vendors, but it's a nice safe space for the end users. And the conversations I hear are increasingly more complex. From the time I joined Cloud Native in 2016 as a part of the Open Tracing project to now in 2020, people have moved leaps and bounds. And that's a testament to their commitment to build better software faster and more reliably.
Patrick, what are the roles that you're seeing are needed to be filled as we start to see more data on Kubernetes, as data on Kubernetes becomes, more common, as people are building out their architectures?
Well, I mean, the role that I really love right now is the SREs, the site reliability engineers. They're really responsible for the stack, and they're the unsung heroes of anything at scale at this point. And so, huge shout out to my SREs out there. And I think that's the growing field, because as we build out more expertise in infrastructure and scale infrastructure, and we reduce the surface area of configuration, the getting down into the weeds. I mean, how many of us has set up a kernel driver on a Linux server? Not too many anymore, right? That's just not a thing that we're doing. But SREs are I think is the role. I counsel young people all the time is if you're interested in infrastructure, learn how to code first, then look at SREs, being an SRE, because that is the future.
Bill?
Yeah, I think overall, in terms of just not scaling out the infrastructure, we're talking about how do we scale our individuals to be able to do more. So when we're talking about these SREs and what maybe was an infrastructure admin in the past, we're talking about a much lower ratio in terms of how many developers are actually being supported by an individual SRE in today's world. So there might be only a team of 10 SREs that's supporting a complete enterprise environment. So really, when we talk about scale, we're not just talking about it from a technology perspective. We're talking about it from a cultural perspective. We're talking about it from the underlying automation that has to happen in order to manage all of these different things that are running in a highly, highly complex environment. So it is a dramatic culture shift. And I think that that's when you talk about what needs to come first is you need to have that visionary. You need to have that person that said, the way we're doing things today or yesterday is no longer going to work for our business. And we need to think about things differently. We need to not go and do these manual efforts. We need to start thinking about how do we do that thing again, but in an automated process manner.
Ani, to finish it up.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that Kubernetes has created a parallel ecosystem and parallel universe. So currently, we have this broad umbrella that says Kubernetes administrator. But what I actually think is, given the complexity and the growing importance of various building blocks within the Kubernetes ecosystem, right? Whether it is network, whether it is storage, whether it is security or release management, we are going to see the counterparts of the traditional administrative roles in the cloud native ecosystem. So I think a year from now, we'll actually see job titles that will say cloud native storage operations professional, storage ops. It's a big deal. And again, an average developer or a Kubernetes administrator cannot deal with complex CNI based networks like Calico. So you need a cloud native network engineer. And then, you have SREs who will cover the entire spectrum. And we're going to have highly focused, specialized DevSecOps roles. So SRE today is like a very broad term, and they are basically doing everything that they can. But eventually, we're going to have very specialized roles and job functions and definitions that will bring laser focus to the building blocks of Kubernetes stack. I think that's where we are headed to.
This has been really great. Thank you all for participating today. And for our virtual pancake breakfast, I hope we get to meet soon over real pancakes. That would be nice. I think that day will come again. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Priyanka Sharma, General Manager of the CNCF. It's great to have you on board there. It's really nice to see you in this role. We've always been big fans of your work. So congratulations and look forward to your leadership. Janakiram. Johnny is the author of our ebook of the second edition, another shameless plug for our Kubernetes ebook. Johnny is such an authority in this space and is just one of the people who we've known for years and really just are such a big fan. Patrick McFadin, Chief Evangelist for Apache Cassandra at DataStax. Patrick, it's been fun getting to know you over the past few months in these recordings. I look forward to our next discussions in person at some point. And Bill Zajac, automation. That's the theme I keep hearing from Bill today. So nice work there. Bill's Regional Director of Solutions Engineering at Dynatrace. Thanks everyone participating. Questions. You can ask your questions here. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So go right ahead and ask away. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.